Newbery Acceptance Speech, Lois, Lowry, June 1994. How do you know where to start? A child asked me once in a schoolroom where I'd been speaking to her class about the writing of books. I shrugged and smiled and told her that I just start wherever it feels right. This evening, it feels right to start by quoting a passage from The Giver, a scene set during the days in which the boy Jonas is beginning to look more deeply into the life that had been very superficial, beginning to see that his own past goes back further than he had ever known and has greater implications than he ever suspected. Now he saw a familiar, wide river beside the path differently. He saw all of the light and color and history it contained and carried in it its slow-moving water, and he knew there was an elsewhere for which it came, and an elsewhere to which it was going. Every author is asked again and again the question we probably each have come to dread the most. How did you get this idea? We give glib and quick answers because there are other hands raised, other kids in the audience waiting. I'd like tonight to dispense with my usual flippancy and glibness and try to tell you the origins of this book. It is a little like Jonas looking into the river and realizing that it carries with it everything that has come from elsewhere. A spring, perhaps, at the beginning, bubbling up from the earth, then a trickle from a glacier, a mountain stream entering further along, and each tributary bringing with it collected bits and pieces from the past, from the distant, from the countless elsewheres, all of it moving, mingled in the current. For me, the tributaries are memories, and I've selected only a few. I'll tell them to you chronologically. I have to go way back. I'm starting 46 years ago. In 1948, I'm 11 years old. I have gone with my mother, sister, and brother to join my father, who has been in Tokyo for 2 years and will be there for several more. We live there, in the center of that huge Japanese city, in a small American enclave with a very American name, Washington Heights. We live in an American-style house with American neighbors, and our little community has its own movie theater which shows American movies, and a small church, a tiny library, an elementary school, and in many ways, it is an odd replica of a United States village. In later adult years, I was to ask my mother why we had lived there instead of taking advantage of the opportunity to live within the Japanese community and to learn the experience a different way of life. But she seemed surprised by my question. She said that we lived where we did because it was comfortable. It was familiar. It was safe. At 11 years old, I'm not a particularly adventurous child, nor am I a rebellious one, but I've always been curious. I have a bicycle. Again and again, countless times without my parents' knowledge, I ride the bicycle to the back gate of the fence that surrounds our comfortable, familiar, safe American community. I ride down a hill because I'm curious, and I enter riding down that hill in familiar, slightly uncomfortable, perhaps even unsafe, though I never feel it to be, area of Tokyo that throbs with life. It is a district called Shibuya. It is crowded with shops, people, and theaters, and street vendors, and day-to-day bustle of Japanese life. I remember, still after all these years, the smells. Fish and fertilizer and charcoal. The music and the sounds, music and shouting, the clatter of wood shoes, the wooden sticks and wooden wheels, and the colors. I remember the babies and toddlers dressed in bright pink and orange and red, most of all. But I remember, too, the dark blue uniforms of the school children, the strangers who are my own age. I wander through Shibuya day after day during all those years when I am 11 12, and 13. I love the feel of it, the vigor, the garnished brightness, and the noise, all of such a contrast to my own life. But I never talk to anyone. I'm not frightened of the people who are so different from me, but I am shy. I watch the children shouting and playing around a school, and they are children my age, and they watch me in return, but we never speak to one another. One afternoon, I am standing on the street corner when a woman near me reaches out, touches my hair, and says something. I back away startled because my knowledge of the language is poor, and I misunderstand her words. I think she said, Chris die, meaning that she dislikes me, and I'm embarrassed and confused, wondering what I had done wrong. Have I had have I disgraced myself? Then after a moment I realized my mistake. She has actually said, Crias Diaz. She has called me pretty, and I look at her. In the crowd, at least to smile, perhaps to say thank you if I can overcome my shyness enough to speak, but she's gone. I remember that moment, this instant of communication gone awry. Again and again over the years, perhaps this is where the river starts. In 1954 and 1955, I'm a college freshman living in a small dormitory, actually a converted private home with a group of perhaps 14 other girls. We are very much alike. We wear the same sort of clothes, cashmere sweaters and plaid wool skirts, knee socks and loafers. We all smoke Marlboro cigarettes and we knit, usually Argyle socks for our boyfriends, and play bridge. Sometimes we study and we get good grades because we're all the cream of the crop, the valedictorians and class presidents from our high schools and all over the United States. One of the girls in our dorms is not like the rest of us. She doesn't wear a uniform. She wears blue jeans instead of skirts. And she doesn't curl her hair, knit, or play bridge. She doesn't date or go to any fraternity parties and dances. She's a smart girl, a good student, a pleasant enough person, but she's different, somehow alien, and it makes us uncomfortable. We react with a kind of mindless cruelty. We don't tease or torment her, but we do something worse. We ignore her. We pretend she doesn't exist. In a small house of 14 young women, we make one invisible. Somehow, by shutting her out, we make ourselves feel comfortable, familiar, safe. I think of her now and then as the years pass. Those thoughts, fleeting but profoundly remorseful, enter the current of the river. In the summer of 1979, I am sent by a magazine I am working in an island off the coast of Maine to write an article about a painter who lives there alone. I spend a good deal of time with this man, and we talk a lot about color. And it is clear to me that although I am a highly visual person, a person who sees and appreciates forms of composition and color, this man's capacity for seeing color goes far beyond mine. I photograph him while I'm there, and I keep a copy of his photograph for myself because there's something about his face, his eyes, which haunt me. Later, I hear that he has become blind. I think about him. His name is Carl Nelson. From time to time, his photograph hangs over my desk, and I wonder what it was like for him to lose the colors about which he is so impassioned. Now and then, I wish in a whimsical way that he could have somehow magically given me the capacity to see the way he did. A little bubble begins, a little spurt, which will trickle into the river. In 1989, I go to a small village in Germany and attend the wedding of one of my sons. It's an ancient church. He marries his Margaret in a ceremony conducted in a language I do not speak and cannot understand. But one section of the service is in English. A woman stands in the balcony of the old stone church and sings the words from the Bible Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. How small the world has become. I think looking around the church at the many people who sit there wishing happiness to my son and his new wife, wishing it in their own language, and I am wishing it in mine. We are all each other's people now, I find myself thinking. Can you feel this memory too? Is a stream that is now entering the river? Another fragment. My father, nearing 90, is in a nursing home. My brother and I have hung family pictures on the wall of his room. During a visit, he and I are talking about the people in the pictures. One is my sister, my parents' first child, who died young of cancer. My father smiles looking at her picture. That's your sister, he says happily. That's Helen. Then he comments, a little puzzled, but not at all sad. I can't remember exactly what happened to her. We can forget pain, I think, and it is comfortable to do so. But I also wonder briefly, is it safe to do that? To forget? That uncertainty pours itself into the river of thought, which will become the book. 1991. I'm in an auditorium somewhere. I have spoken at length about my book, Number the Stars, which has been honored with the 1990 Newbery Medal. A woman raises her hand when the turn for her question comes. She sighs very loudly and says, Why do we have to tell this Holocaust thing over and over? Is it really necessary? I answer her as well as I can, quoting, in fact, my German daughter-in-law, who has said to me, No one knows better than we Germans that we must tell this again and again. But I think about her question and my answer a great deal. Wouldn't it, I think, playing devil's advocate to myself, make for a more comfortable world to forget the Holocaust? And I remember again and again how comfortable, familiar, and safe my parents had sought to make my childhood by shielding me from elsewhere. But I remember too that my response has been to open the gate again and again. My instinct had been a child's attempt to see for myself what lie beyond the wall. And thinking becomes another tributary into the river of thought that will create the giver. Here's another memory. I'm sitting in a booth with my daughter in a little Beacon Hill pub where she and I often have lunch together. The television is on in the background behind the bar, as it always is. She and I are talking. Suddenly, I gesture to her. I say, Shh, because I've heard a fragment of the news, and I'm startled, anxious, and want to hear the rest. Someone has walked into the fast food place with an automatic weapon and randomly killed a number of people. My daughter stops talking and waits while I listen to the rest. Then I relax. I say to her in a relieved voice, It's all right. It was in Oklahoma. Or perhaps it was Alabama or Indiana. She stares at me in amazement, as if I had said such a hideous thing. How comfortable I made myself feel for a moment by reducing my own realm of caring to my own familiar neighborhood. How safe I deluded myself into feeling. I think about that, and it becomes a torrent that enters the flow of the river, turbulent by now, that is clogged with memories and thoughts and ideas that begin to mesh and intertwine. The river begins to seek a place to spill over. When Jonas meets the giver for the first time and tries to comprehend what lies before him, he says in confusion, I thought there was only us. I thought there was only now. In beginning to write The Giver, I created, as I always do in every book, a world that exists only in my imagination, a world of Only us, only now. I tried to make Jonas's world seem familiar, comfortable, and safe. And I tried to seduce the reader. I seduced myself along the way. It did feel good, that world. I got rid of the things I fear and dislike, all the violence, prejudice, poverty, and injustice. And I even threw in for good measure the way of life because I liked the idea of it. One child has pointed out in a letter that the people of Jonas's world don't even have to do dishes. It is very, very tempting to leave it at that. But I've never been a writer of fairy tales. And if I've learned anything through the river of memories, it is that we can't live in a walled world, in an only us, only now world where we are all the same and feel safe. We would have to sacrifice too much. The richness of color, the diversity would disappear. Feelings of other humans would no longer be necessary. Choice would be obsolete. And besides, I had ridden my bike elsewhere as a child, and I liked it there, but had never been brave enough to tell anyone about it. So it was time. A letter I've kept for a very long time is from a child who has read my book called Anastasia Kirpnik. Her letter, she's a girl, her name is Paula from Louisville, Kentucky, says, I really like the book you wrote about Anastasia and her family because it made me laugh every time I read it. I especially like it when she didn't want to have a baby brother in the house because she has to clean up after him every time and change his diapers when her mother and father aren't home. And she doesn't like to give him a bath or watch him all the time or put him to sleep every night while her mother goes to work. Here's the fascinating thing. Nothing that the child describes actually happens in the book. The child, as we all do, has brought her own life into the book. She has found a place in the pages of the book, and shares her own frustrations and feelings. The same thing is happening, as I hoped it would happen, with the giver. Those of you who have hoped I would stand here tonight and reveal the true ending, the right interpretation of the ending, will be disappointed. There isn't one. There's a right one for each of us, and it depends on our own beliefs and our own hopes. Let me tell you a few endings which are the right endings for a few children out there, and many who have written to me. From a sixth grader, I think that when they are traveling, they were traveling in a circle. When they came to elsewhere, it was their old community, but they had accepted the memories and all the feelings that go along with it. From another, Jonas was kind of like Jesus because he took the pain for everyone else in the community so they wouldn't have to suffer. And at the very end of the book, when Jonas and Gabe reached the place that they knew as elsewhere, you described elsewhere as if it were heaven. And one more. A lot of people I know would hate that ending, but not me. I loved it, mainly because I got to make the book happy. I decided they made it. They made it to the past. I decided the past was our world, and the future of their world, what it was parallel worlds. Finally, from one seventh grade boy, I was really surprised that they just died in the end. That was a bummer. You could have made them stay alive, I thought. Very few find it a bummer. Most of the young readers who have written to me have perceived the magic of the circular journey, the truth that we go out and come back, and that what we come back to is changed. And so are we. Perhaps I have been traveling in a circle too. Things come together and become complete. Here is what I've come back to. The daughter who was with me and looked at me in horror the day I fell victim to thinking, only us, only now, and that what happened in Oklahoma or Alabama or Indiana didn't matter, was the first person to read the manuscript of The Giver. The college classmate who was different lives, last I heard, very happily in New Jersey with another woman who shares her life. I can only hope that she has forgiven us, who are young in a more frightened and less enlightened time. My son and Margaret, his German wife, the one who reminded me how important it is to tell our stories again and again, painful though they often are, now have a little girl who will be the receiver of all their memories. Their daughter had crossed the Atlantic 3 times before she was 6 months old. Presumably, my granddaughter will never be fearful of elsewhere. Carl Nelson, the man who lost color, but not the memory of them, is the face on the cover of this book. He died in 1989, but left a vibrant legacy of paintings. One hangs now in my home. I'm especially happy to stand here tonight on this platform with Alan Say, because it truly brings my journey full circle. Alan was 12 years old when I was. He lived in Sabaya, that alien elsewhere I went as a child on a bicycle. He was one of the different, the dark-eyed children in blue school uniforms that I was too timid to do more than stand at the edge of their schoolyard, smile shyly, and wonder what their lives were like. Now I can say to Alan that I wish I could have said then, I'm sorry, my pronunciation, Washi no Kamachi das. Greetings, my friend. I have been asked whether the Newbery medal is, actually, an odd sort of burden in terms of the greater responsibility one feels. Whether one is paralyzed by it, fearful of being able to live up to the standard it represents. For me, the opposite has been true. I think of 1990, Newbery freed me to risk failure. Other people took a risk with me, of course. One was my editor, Walter Lorraine, who has never, to my knowledge, been afraid to take a chance. Walter cares more about what this book has to say than he does about whether he can turn it into a stuffed animal or a calendar or a movie. The Newbery Committee was gutsy too. There have been safer books, more comfortable books, more familiar books. They took a trip beyond the realm of sameness with this one, and I think they should be very proud of that. And all of you as well. Let me say something to those of you here who do such dangerous work. The man that I named the giver passed along the boy knowledge, history, memories, color, pain, laughter, love, and truth. Every time you place a book in the hands of a child, you do the same. It's very risky. But each time a child opens a book, he pushes open the gate that separates him from elsewhere. It gives him choice. It gives him freedom. Those are magnificent, wonderfully unsafe things. I have been greatly honored by you now 2 times. It is impossible to express my gratitude for that. Perhaps the only way really is to return to Boston, to my office, to my desk, and go back to work in hopes that whatever I do next will justify the faith in me that this medal represents. There are other rivers flowing.